there isn't an ability to approve anything. So we're always making sure we have a quorum. There are mechanisms in state law and in the city code that can compel attendance at a common council meeting. We've luckily never had to use that, but you can go haul someone out of their house or something like that. But usually we just make sure that we're communicating. If you're not able to attend, usually the clerk knows ahead of time, and so we can kind of plan around those absences. But we do have to have a quorum to get anything done as a governing body.
I have a question. So
Yeah.
you say the clerk tracks that. So if I can't make a meeting, should I contact the clerk? But I've contacted Tim in the past.
I would defer to the two of them how they prefer that.
Either one's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
It is good to reach out and let someone know if you have a planned absence, because there's been many occasions where suddenly we know 3 of you will be on vacation, and it doesn't pay to get everybody else here only to find we don't have a quorum, so we can't get anything done anyway. All right, why do we care? Why do we care about Robert's rules? Why do we care about a procedural rules? Because it facilitates the smooth functioning of the assembly, provides a firm basis for resolving questions of procedure, and provides organizational stability. So when you're having your debate, you should have an understanding of the procedural aspects of that when you're looking to get something done as a member of the Common Council. Here's how you do it. So the motion, debate, and action. You obtain the floor, and that's where you say, Mayor, and he calls on you. You make your motion. It needs a second. If it doesn't get a second, the motion dies for a lack of second. So you obtain the floor, you make a motion, the motion is seconded, the chair restates the motion. We have a first and a second to approve resolution number 6, blah, blah, blah. Then it's members' debate. So that's where you say, well, I'm going to vote in favor of resolution number 6 because I think this. Or you say, I'm going to vote against it because I don't think it does something. So that's your debate part. And then you put it to a vote. You vote, and then the chair announces the results. Okay, and you'll see a little bit later on why it's important, some of these aspects, like the chair restating the motion. All right, when you're making your motion, you can preface it with a few words of explanation. And one of the roles of the chair, we're going to talk about what the chair's role is in the meeting, but one of them is to assist members in framing the motion. The maker of the motion may not withdraw it once it is stated by the chair. Then it becomes property of the body, right? So you have your first, you have your second, and then once the mayor restates it, now it is before you for consideration, okay? So there's some procedural steps if you wish to change it, we'll get into those. Speaking to the motion. So the member who makes the motion is entitled to be recognized first in speaking on the motion. You don't have to speak on the motion, but if you wish to, you're entitled to be recognized first. Only Common Council members have the privilege of the floor. And what that means is that when we're speaking to the motion, the debate, it's between you. The mayor, as the chair of the meeting, has the ability to ask others to participate, and very frequently you might see Tim or I raise our hands to be recognized if we have something to make sure that the council is aware of. But really it's for the body who's listening. It isn't for them to say, well, I want to chime in on this motion that's pending. They don't have the privilege of the floor. That is up to you guys. The mayor, as the chair, has the ability to say, well, we have so-and-so applicant here. Maybe he's able to answer that question. So the mayor has the ability to select someone who might be in the audience for specific input, but there is no right from the public to participate in the debate. So speaking to the motion, you need to obtain the floor. Again, that's kind of raise your hand, say, Mr. Mayor. And then discussion of any question is permitted only with a reference to a pending question. So as you're in debate, you need to focus your debate on what the motion is. What is the question that is before the assembly? So it's designed to keep you on task about what the motion is what you're supposed to be discussing. Until a matter is brought before the assembly in the form of a motion, it cannot be debated. Okay, so the way that we normally handle things is Tim might present, I might present, you might have another consultant presenting, and usually we have a few questions. But when you get into the, I agree with this, or I'm going to vote in favor of this, that's really debate. You should have your motion and your second before you start getting into how you, as an individual alderperson, are going to be voting on something. That's your debate part. A general rule against discussion without a motion is one of parliamentary procedure's most powerful tools for keeping business on track, right? So it's designed, especially in large assemblies. If you think about if you had 200 alderpersons here who all wanted to talk about it, it would be chaos unless we had more structure. The first, the second, and then the debate.
So if a second isn't made, that motion is done.
It fails for lack of a second.
Yeah.
Yep. And the mayor would say that. You know, is there a second? And everyone's silent, no one says anything. And the motion fails for lack of a second. And then there would be an opportunity for someone to make another motion. So here's one of our first rules of debate related to our presiding officer. Most circumstances, that's going to be the mayor. The presiding officer must never interrupt because he or she knows more about the matter than the speaker, right? So we want to encourage everyone to be able to say their piece. The maker of the motion may vote against it, but he or she is not allowed to speak against his or her own motion. Okay? That makes sense, right? You can't, otherwise you just wouldn't make the motion. You wouldn't make a motion and then say, I don't agree with my own motion. No, you can't do that. You can vote against it after you've heard the debate. Maybe your fellow alders have convinced you that that's not a good idea. So you can vote against it, but you can't speak against it. And then avoid personalities, don't question motives of each other, and all remarks go through the chair. And I think we do a pretty good job of that. Getting the mayor's attention, asking questions through the mayor, addressing the mayor as we're in the midst of debate. The length and number of speeches. I don't really think we have a problem with this one, but there are rules about how long you can go on. Sometimes you hear about filibustering, those kinds of things. So there are limitations on how long you can speak and how many times. Avoid use of members' names. The presiding officer should not be referred to by name, right? And we say, that's why we say Mr. Mayor or Mayor. And then the presiding officer speaks of himself or herself in the third person. So the mayor does a good job of that. Avoid mentioning each other's names when you can describe it another way. The city administrator, for example. So we use titles for addressing the chair. So I touched on this a little bit before. All of your questions should be funneled through the chair. You shouldn't be addressing the TV cameras. You shouldn't be addressing the audience. When you're in debate, you are up here and your questions are going through the mayor. He's responsible for facilitating the debate and has several other roles that he needs to fill, but that's how it should be working. We're a little bit more casual that way, but I think overall we do a pretty good job. Duties of the chair. All persons at a meeting have an obligation to obey the presiding officer. Sometimes we have members who use the parliamentary forms, that means parliamentary procedure, for obstructive purposes. So there might be motions that are continuously being made that are failing, for example, and that the person keeps trying to make them. The mayor can say, no, I'm ruling this out of order. We're not going to take that off. Enforcing the rules related to debate, order, and decorum. Reminding members to confine remarks to the merits of the question. So it's important to confine your remarks to the merits of the question, not only from a procedural standpoint, but also, and if you remember, we have our Wisconsin statutes, we want to make sure that we're not veering too far off topic such that now we're getting into an issue with our open meetings laws, that we haven't adequately notified the public that this is going to be under discussion. So that's another reason why we want to confine remarks to the merits of the question, which should be related to the agenda item. The mayor announces, or the chair, announces issues, keeps members on track, restates the motion to place before the body, and for clarity, recognizes members, so you guys get his attention. He says, Alder Matsdorf, asks for votes on each side and announces the outcome, and responds to requests and rules on points of order. Does everyone understand what points of order are? We're going to talk a little bit about that. Points of order. Okay. The presiding officer should relinquish the chair if entering the discussion, taking a position on the debate, and wanting to get into the mix of it and arguing for a specific outcome. The exception is with small boards and committees. Improving the motion. So this one's a little bit hard to read. But after the motion has been made, but before the chair announces it, any member may suggest one or more modifications to the motion. There should be minor changes, so they might be word tweaks. Before the chair announces the motion, it's the property of the maker. So whoever makes that motion has control over it. But once the chair announces it, it's properly before the body, and it becomes the property of the body. So after it, the maker may ask for unanimous consent to modify or withdraw. A lot of times you hear that as friendly amendment, and unique to the city of Plymouth, we have some language in the city code that talks about that friendly amendment concept. And we say no motion shall be withdrawn or amended without the consent of the person making the same and the person seconding it. So a lot of times if there are some changes to the motion that come up during discussion, you might hear the mayor say, is that change acceptable to the first and second? Usually there's nods, but we do have a city code provision that specifically addresses that. Improper motions. So the cartoon says, I move that we debate whether to vote to decide whether to discuss bringing this meeting to an end. It's not very clear. I've heard at meetings, I would like to make a motion to discuss. That isn't a proper motion. That should be ruled out of order. If the wording of the motion is unclear, it's the duty of the chair to see that the motion is put into a suitable format, preserving the motion's intent. So I think it's always a good idea, if you have the ability to frame a motion in the positive, to do it that way. And here's an example. If you want to deny something, let's say it's a rezoning request that comes before you. My suggestion would be, I move to deny approval, right? Instead of I move to not grant. Whenever you put that not in there, it's very confusing to people who are voting on it. I move to not grant. So should I vote yes or should I vote no? Right? So if you say I move to deny, it just makes for a cleaner motion. Motion to lay on the table. This one is frequently used incorrectly. So this is the only specific motion that I really wanted to touch on tonight. We have a lot of different motions. This is my Robert's Rules book. So it's, I don't know how many pages. It's many pages. But the motion to lay on the table. So that's really designed when you have another urgent matter that might come up while you're in the midst of debate on something. And that's where it would be appropriate to make a motion to lay it on the table. You're temporarily setting it aside, but you're going to take it up at that same meeting. So if you had somebody here who was a consultant that needed to leave for another meeting and maybe a prior agenda item was taking longer than you thought, you might make a motion to lay on the table so you could get to other business that's on your agenda. It's commonly misused in place of postpone indefinitely or postpone to a certain time. So It's really, and we came across this, I think rather recently with one of our rezoning, requests. So if you're looking to kill the motion, you're not just gonna lay it on the table, you're looking to postpone it indefinitely is what you're looking to do if you wish for the body to take no action. Yeah.
So if there's a motion on the table, can somebody then say, I move that we,
Bring it back,
or no,
take it off the
take it
table
off the table?
and discuss it?
I guess.
A lot, and I think the way it would probably work, is the mayor would say, and now we're going to move on, we're gonna move back to the item that we've laid on the table, and we'll bring it back before the assembly. So the chair is really your guide for the meeting, and they get to control things that way. A lot of times we'll do things by consent, where the mayor may say, unless there is any objection, we're gonna take this off the table and move back to this item that we, previously had to lay on the table. So he might say something like that, but otherwise, yes, there would be a motion and a second to remove it from the table, to bring it back before the assembly to continue discussion.
And that can happen at the end of the meeting or any time during the meeting?
I think it's something you would see what the mayor does with it. But yes, you could bring it back at any time during the meeting. It should just be a temporary break from whatever you were discussing, that there was an urgent matter that came up that needed the assembly's attention. And so in practice, you're gonna go back to that item you laid on the table as soon as you can.
Well, going back to that issue we had with the zoning or
Yep.
whatever, should we have brought that back on the, was that proper to say we're gonna decide on that later on?
So, and that's where we have one of those connections between our state law, right? That says you have to put it on an agenda if you're gonna talk about it. So even if you lay something on the table, and I think the way we resolved that zoning one was postponed it.
That was a specific 3-month postponement.
There were actually a couple. The other one was to check with
Yeah.
the owners of the property.
So that one was postponed. But as I recall that meeting, we didn't actually have any motions pending. Everybody just kind of went into debate. And then there was a motion to table, which you can't do unless you have, a motion to approve or to deny. So did we do something wrong? No, we didn't.
Okay.
I wanted to just touch on the committee debates. So all of you are on committees, and those are generally more informal. So Robert's Rules recognizes that we treat our smaller committees differently than we do when we get to the Common Council meeting. So there's no rules on how often you can speak or for how long. The chair can engage in the debate with you and take a position, and you have more informal discussion permitted before the motion. So it's more informal than when we get to the Common Council meetings. Refrain from disturbing the assembly. This isn't an issue that I see in the city of Plymouth, but there are rules about disturbing the assembly. So no whispering to each other during the meetings, no walking across the floor, or engaging in other behavior that disturbs the assembly. I've seen meetings where you might have an elected official leave their position and go talk to someone in the audience and then come back. No, that is disturbing the assembly. That is not allowed, and that's where the chair can gavel and yell at you. Voting rights of abstention. I get a lot of questions about abstentions. So it is the duty of every member who has an opinion on a question to express it by his or her vote. That's why you're elected. You're representatives of your constituents, and unless you can't vote, and we'll get into that when we talk about ethics, you should be casting a vote. You should be having an opinion. But you can't abstain. You have freedom of speech. You don't check those at the door when you walk in. No one can force you to vote. We can't compel you to vote. So if you sat here every meeting and said, I abstain for every question, none of us can force you to vote. Your constituents probably aren't gonna like it, you won't get reelected, but that is the remedy. So we can't compel you to vote. Explaining your vote. So that is debate, is the proper time for you to explain why you're voting a certain way. Once the question is called and you're moving into voting, the time to explain why you're voting a certain way is over. Then you're just casting your vote, yay or nay. Changing your vote. You see this from time to time. So you as an alderperson have the right to change your vote up until the time the result is announced. So if you remember that list of 8 kind of steps, the result is announced, the chair is going to announce the result. After the result is announced, you can't change your vote unless you get permission of the rest of the council. So you can only change your vote after the result is announced by unanimous consent of the council. Okay? So once the mayor says the motion passes, we've got 5 yeses and 3 noes, motion passes. You can't change your vote after that unless everybody else says it's okay. And in a split vote, I'm guessing not everyone else is going to say it's okay. Point of order. So we mentioned this earlier. So as a council member, you have the ability to raise a point of order. And you can really do that at any time. You can get acknowledged by the mayor. You can raise a point of order in the middle of debate if you feel that something needs to be done differently. So it doesn't require a second, it's not debatable, and then it's ruled on by the chair. So a point of order might be if you feel that one of your fellow alders is veering way off course and is starting to get into discussion that isn't relevant to the question, is maybe focused on something that you did 3 meetings ago. You can say, you know, Mayor, point of order, I think we need to get back on track. The mayor can rule on that. Even though the mayor has the right to rule on it, you guys don't have to accept it. So any 2 members have the right to appeal from the ruling of the chair. One makes the appeal, the other seconds. Then the question is taken from the chair and put to the rest of the council, and you can decide if you want to overrule the decision of the chair. Oh, this was a fun transition. Okay. Ethics. So, all right. My goal for this ethics portion is not to answer all of the questions because it's going to be so fact intensive. Every ethics situation you encounter is really going to be dependent on the facts of that specific situation. What my goal is to raise awareness so that you can issue spot. Where if something's going on and you think, wait a minute, maybe I should talk to Crystal about this. That's what I'm hoping happens. Because I think you're probably not going to have all of the answers, but I want you to be aware of these ethical rules. All right, so the Code of Ethics is in Title 2, Chapter 5, and it establishes, this is your city code, it establishes guidelines for ethical standards. It applies to all City of Plymouth officials and employees, whether elected or appointed, paid or unpaid, including members of boards, committees, and commissions of the city. So here's what your city code of ethics says. No official, employee, or candidate may do any of the following: use city-owned vehicles, equipment, materials, or other property for personal convenience or profit. Grant any special consideration, treatment, or advantage to any person beyond that which is available to other persons. Disclose confidential information obtained in the course of service to the city, or use such information to advance the financial or private interest of any person, accept or solicit gifts or favors, and we're going to talk more about that one. Hiring of family members is discouraged and does require disclosure of that relationship. The disclosing confidential information obtained in the course of service. Can anyone think of where you might commonly encounter something like that?
Closed session.
Closed sessions, that's right. That's exactly where you're encoding some of that confidential information. So you can't disclose it. That would be an ethical violation for you to take things you've learned in closed session because of your role as an older person, and then using that out in the community or letting others in on that information. All right, so we have our city code of ethics. We have statutes as well. So you have two different ethical obligations or codes that you need to be following. State law and your city code, and they're not identical. So you've got different things you need to be aware of. Here's what the statute says. So an older person cannot use your position to obtain financial gain or anything of substantial value for the private benefit of himself or herself or his or her immediate family or for an organization with which he or she is associated. You can't solicit or accept from any person directly or indirectly anything of value if it could reasonably be expected to influence the local public official's vote, official actions or judgment, or could reasonably be considered as a reward for any official action or inaction on the part of the local public official. So a lot of times I'll get questions where someone will say, hey, I'm not sure if I have a conflict of interest here or not. And as I analyze the statute and city code, we may conclude that there isn't a technical conflict of interest, but there's always that appearance of a conflict. And we want to make sure that the public feels that there's transparency, that you are acting in the best interest of the public. And so even though there may not be a technical conflict, that's where you may see some people choose to abstain from a vote because they don't want to create that appearance that they are casting a vote that would favor their son or daughter, for example. Even though it may not technically be a conflict of interest, when the community sees that, they're going to believe that there is an appearance that something is being done underhanded, or that there's favoritism being shown. All right, this is again state law. You can't directly or indirectly give, promise, or withhold your vote or influence, or to take or refrain from official action in exchange for political contributions, right? Nowhere in this code does it say bribe, but if you think about it in simple terms, is there a tit for tat concept going on? Right, so you can't do anything that benefits not only yourself, but also your immediate family or an organization with which you're associated. Substantial value, what is it? I don't know. It's not defined in the statutes or the city code. And so that's part of when I say it's all very fact specific. It really is. The language I have here about what's included and what's excluded, this comes from our Sheboygan County Code. It doesn't apply to you. You're not, well, Alder Nelson, it applies to you, but everyone else it doesn't. But this is how they've defined to help give some guidance to the elected officials as to what's included and what's not. All right, gifts and favors. Here's your city code. You cannot solicit or accept anything of value, including gifts and favors, either directly or indirectly, from any person who is known to be interested directly or indirectly in any business dealing with the city. That's the easy one, right? So if you had a developer come in and say, hey, Alder Matsdorf, I'm gonna slip you $1,000 for that yes vote. Okay, right? Yeah. But the rest of them are a lot harder. That may create the perception of influence on the recipient, right? That one's a little murkier. These are unique to the city of Plymouth. You cannot accept hospitality if after consideration of the surrounding circumstances, it could reasonably be concluded that such hospitality would not be extended were not for the fact that the guest or a member of the guest's immediate family was a city official or employee. All right, so let's say Alder Nelson goes down to the cheese counter. And you say, oh, Alder Nelson, so wonderful to see you. Lunch is on us today. Right? Okay, well, is that substantial value? does it sure seem like it's hospitality because you're an elected official? It sure does seem like it. Gifts received by an official or employee or his immediate family under unusual circumstances shall be referred to the common council within 10 days of receipt for recommended disposition. So what should you do if you're in that awkward position where someone is trying to show you gratitude in the form of a gift? Here's one thing you can do. You can bring it to the common council. It can be referred for disposition. So there may be a use for it. Maybe it's something that has value to the city, but it shouldn't be a gift to you as an individual because you are part of the city council. Otherwise, declining it is okay too. I think that creates a little bit more of that awkwardness that people sometimes are hesitant to say, oh no, I can't take that, or I don't want that. But you can always say, hey, my ethical rules prohibit me. I'd love to do that, but my ethical rules prohibit me from accepting that. All right, what should you do if you don't know what to do? Talk to me. That's what you should do. So our city code allows you to request advisory opinions from me. Those are confidential, unless you choose to make them public. And the few times that I've done the advisory opinions, the individuals have chosen to make those public. So you can request an opinion from me. Look to City Code, Section 2-5-8, and if you're in doubt, refrain from discussion and abstention on the vote. So abstaining from the vote is key. Don't vote on it. But also, don't use your position to influence the vote, and that's where you're going to refrain from the discussion. So if you're not sure, if you have a conflict of interest, don't encourage your fellow alders to vote a certain way, okay? Refrain from the discussion, refrain from the vote. Penalties. Can I just touch briefly on these? Yeah, I mean, there's felonies, there's misdemeanors, there's forfeitures, so it can be serious. So that's why it's just important to be aware. And again, if you have a specific situation that comes up, we can absolutely talk through it. All right. What do you think, Mayor? You want me to pause on the rest of them? I made it through what I was hoping to make it through in the 45 minutes.
I think that's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll have Anna forward the PowerPoint, so you can look at the open meetings information. And I've just got one slide on public records, just to again, make you aware of your obligations, and certainly we can schedule additional time if you want more opportunity to discuss some of those issues. So, any questions on the procedural rules or the ethics that we went through? Yeah.
Regarding the ethics, we have a closed session, and next week in the newspaper, a headline occurs talking about one of the items that we talked about in closed session. Does that relieve the council from confidentiality because of it is out in public?
No.
No.
You should not be disclosing items that you discussed in closed session. For many of the closed session items, there is a corresponding action that will occur in
Yes.
open session. So if there is a development agreement, for example, once that development agreement is approved, even when it's introduced to the council in its final form, those are subject to records requests, so we would be disclosing the agreement, but you're not going to be disclosing those confidential discussions that you've had.
Okay.
Other questions? All right.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think it's a very good reminder of some of the responsibilities that we have as elected officials to have some formality to the process that people can see we're following. And open meetings are the law of the land. So that's good. Thank you very
All right,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
With that, the chair will obtain a motion to adjourn.
Also moved.
second the motion to
We
adjourn.
have